Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for today's webinar, The Pathway to Youth Advocacy, Strategies to Support Young People. I'm Minnie Chen from Mentor. I'm tuning in from Durham, North Carolina. I love seeing where everyone's coming from, the weather and your locations: sunny Los Angeles, rainy Northern Kentucky, sunny and hot Florida. We have some folks from Portland, Southwest Pennsylvania, North Carolina, sunny Tucson, Arizona. It's great to have you all. Snowy Casper, Wyoming. Love hearing what the weather is like where you're all located. So if you haven't gotten the chance, feel free to say hello in the chat. And yeah, what you're looking forward to learning today for the webinar. Before we get started, just some housekeeping and how you can participate in today's webinar. All attendees have been muted for best sound, but we definitely want you all to engage with us through the chat. Feel free to type any questions in the Q&A panel at the bottom of the control panel. If you need any live captioning, we have the CC button as well, if you will need access to that. Again, if you haven't introduced already and said hi in the chat, feel free to do so. And then before we get started, we also have a couple polls just to see who's in the audience and kind of what your experience level is. So the first poll is, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? So if you're a beginner, kind of just getting started, experienced, a few years of experience being involved in mentoring, or an expert, so we've been doing this work for a really long time. Share results there. So it looks like 55% of everyone here are experienced. Then we have 32% beginners and we have 13% experts. It's great to see the range of experience levels. Our second poll is kind of, what is your role in the mentoring field, or what best describes your role in the mentoring field? Are you a mentoring program staff or practitioner? Are you mentor, an educator, technical assistance provider, researcher, funder, or other? And feel free, if you don't see your role represented here, to type in the chat kind of, what is your role in the mentoring field, or how are you connected to mentoring? We'll close out the poll and then just share the results. So it looks like 61% of you all are mentoring program staff or practitioners. So you work in a mentoring program. We have 17% mentors, 4% educators, 2% technical assistance providers, 5% researchers, 4% funders, and 8% other. So thank you all for joining, and we hope today's information shared on the webinar will be applicable to all of you in your work and what you do. Additional information around this webinar and the webinar series. The webinar is being recorded, and all attendees and registered folks will receive a PDF of the presentation as well as a recording. We will also be putting all of this information on the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage with the slides recordings. And just a reminder to please help us out by answering the survey questions at the end of the webinar, and that will pop up right after you close out. Now on to kind of introducing today's webinar. So things you'll be learning and kind of hearing from our panelists today include strategies and practices to engage and support youth in advocacy, ways mentors and organizations can support youth and mentees, and kind of discussing the connection between advocacy, leadership, and mentoring. So really excited to have different perspectives and some young folks joining us to hear more about their perspectives and experiences with advocacy. So now I'm going to introduce our facilitator for today's webinar. Bianca Myrick is the founder and executive director of Pretty Purposed, a nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring communities to empower young women and girls through mentorship and enrichment programming. Bianca is also the executive director of the Virginia Association of Environmental Education, championing the use of education to advance environmental literacy and civic engagement to create a more equitable and sustainable future. As a consultant, Bianca is able to support individuals, organizations, and businesses, specifically in the areas of youth development. And she is a graduate of Virginia State University, where she now serves as an adjunct professor, teaching other students about the nonprofit sector, human services work, and philanthropy. Bianca also has a master's degree in public administration from Virginia Commonwealth University. In addition to being a grassroots nonprofit leader, she dedicates her time to grant making to Black and Brown-led organizations and individuals as a founding member of the Collective 365. So really excited to turn it over to Bianca to help facilitate and introduce our guest panelists. Thank you so much.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So excited to be here and so excited to have our guest here. Our first guest is Kristen Lennox. Kristen is the Advocacy and Engagement Manager at Voices for Virginia's Children. She is responsible for identifying advocacy opportunities, developing traditional, digital, and grassroots engagement and advocacy strategies, and mobilizing advocates to support policy priorities. Kristen has delivered global workshops and trainings on themes of trauma-informed care, healing-centered engagement, and de-escalation. Kristen is passionate about increasing equity and community resources and mental health access for youth and families in Virginia. She earned her bachelor's and master's of social work from Virginia Commonwealth University and is currently an adjunct instructor with VCU School of Social Work. She is a practicing licensed clinical social worker and certified trauma and resilience practitioner. Yay, Kristen. All right, I would love to introduce our next panelist, Kendall. Kendall is a full-time student, writer, mentoring advocate, and aspiring lawyer from Covington, Kentucky. After being a mentee for 4 years, she served as a board member for her local mentoring program, Covington Partners, to help ensure that a student's perspective was shown in all mentoring-related decisions. Now a freshman at the University of Louisville, she pursues a degree centered around restorative justice and peace studies. Kendall has worked with Mentor National as well as the National Mentoring Resource Center on youth advocacy, as well as establishing one of the first official peer mentoring guides. And last but certainly not least, we have our third panelist, Khalil Sacco. Khalil is an aspiring lawyer, politician, and board member. He is currently a senior studying political science and economics and plans to enter the workforce, gain professional experience, and then pursue his master's in political economy. He is dedicated to using his expertise in mentoring, advocacy, and leadership in hopes of transforming the school-to-prison pipeline into the school-to-career pipeline. In addition to his career pursuits, he serves his community as a mentor, advocate, and ambassador. All right, so let's just kind of take a pulse again of who's in the room. So we just have one poll question. What experience do you or your organization have with youth advocacy? What experience do you or your organization have with youth advocacy? So do you have a lot of experience, some, none, or your organization does not or cannot do advocacy work? All right, so it looks like we have a bit of a mix here with 36% of respondees saying they have quite a bit of experience, 38% saying some, and about 21% saying we're just getting started. All right, and 4% say you cannot do advocacy. Okay, well, I think today is going to be really beneficial just because we have two people on here who are current and former youth advocates, and then we also have someone who does the work within an organization of engaging youth in advocacy. So let's go ahead and get started. So, Kristen, to get us started on youth advocacy, could you tell us just a little bit about what your organization does and your experience in this space?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Bianca. Hey, everyone. Happy to be joining you all today. So as Bianca introed, I'm with Voices for Virginia's Children. I think I saw some attendees are tuning in from Richmond, so you may be familiar. But our mission is up there. I won't read it word for word, but we're a 501c3 based out of Richmond, Virginia, with a mission to champion state policies that support children and families across the Commonwealth. So we are nonpartisan. You can see some of our policy areas here: early care and education, child welfare, mental health, of course. But I just say that we are always on the side of whatever will help all children and young people and families thrive across the Commonwealth. So my role there is as the Advocacy and Engagement Manager at Voice. So that's another way that I think I explain that is I'm a connector and I'm a convener. I connect people with experiences, lived experiences, to those that really need to hear those voices and understand those stories.
Thank you. So, how would you say that you equip and prepare youth for advocacy work?
Yeah, so some of what we do is working in storytelling, helping to boost their self-esteem, connecting and just doing the basics of like legislative advocacy. So, it's more than just the Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill. Like, it's a very complicated, especially here in Virginia, process. So we start there, and then we work through storytelling, through media. We talk about the value of their voice. We talk to them about what justice advocacy can look like. And these are just some examples of how we do elevate youth voice. So some things we've done are press conferences. We've got rallies. We got a rally coming up on Monday. Public testimonies that happen down at General Assembly here in Virginia, which is in session right now. Sometimes blog writing, video blogs or PSAs and interviews and that kind of thing. The pictures you see here are from our most recent advocacy day. Of course, everything was virtual. So that's just a picture of us, some screenshots of us meeting with delegates.
Oh, sorry about that, Kristen. I meant to say, what are some
I think we figured it out.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You're fine.
So, I mean, you all are doing a lot of great work and you've got a lot of great examples of the different programs and activities that you've got going on. So when you're engaging your youth in this, what are some of the things that you do to actually prepare them for this work?
Yes, and I think I've got some of that on the next slide too for you. Yeah, preparing for advocacy, a lot of it is really building trust also. So we started with establishing group rules, which really set the tone for the group and helped it feel like a brave and safe space. And then building trust with individuals. We recognize that, especially when you're working with people with lived experience, that you're asking them to tell really intimate parts of their lives and their stories. And then we find that as they meet in these really powerful groups, more stories come out that they may not have expected to be telling. So establishing trust right at the beginning is really important. Whenever you're working with young people, I think regardless of if they're like 18 and over, I think it's important to engage their supports and their caregivers. That way they just know who their young people are talking to. And I think having that mutual trust was really important. We hosted lots of workshops. So some were in the legislative process, like I said before, justice advocacy, and what that really means, and then storytelling. So helping guide them through how to use their voice. We did lots of meetings with policy analysts on our teams, and then some small group, as well as offering one-on-one storytelling coaching for folks that just were really looking for more support.
So with that being said, I know that you're working, with a diverse group of young people. How do you keep equity at the forefront?
Yes, a great question. Can we have the next slide, Minnie? Thank you. So I wanted to name one thing that I think can always, it's a slippery slope when you're engaging with folks with lived experience, but especially young people, is avoiding tokenism. So, engaging with others without equity at the forefront is just a slippery slope for tokenism. For folks that aren't familiar with that, tokenism is the practice of doing something like hiring somebody or having somebody be the face of something to really just prevent criticism or give the appearance that you have diversity or equity or inclusion. But without follow through, without all of the other things that make it an equitable experience, tokenism is something you can run the risk of by if you're just like collecting people to represent something. So I think it's important to center and uplift lived experience. So one way we did that is I asked folks, young people for our recent cohort, what they wanted to bring to advocates before giving them like all of our policy priorities. We just found that that way we weren't pigeonholing anyone. We were letting them really drive their own stories and focusing in on their passions. It's also really important to offer some sort of compensation. Some people will really volunteer this, of course, but if it can be financial, like a stipend or an honorarium, but also compensating with like networking and references, skill building. That's what a lot of young people are really looking for when they're engaging with folks. So finding some way to really pour into them, I think, is another way to explain that. I think mindfully following up and offering debriefs. So offers to check in, especially if you know they were sharing really difficult stories, so that you can kind of just wrap them up in care. And then asking what they want to learn while they are in this experience, how they want to grow, so that again, you can really be pouring into them and it's a reciprocal relationship.
No, thank you for that, Kristen. So how do you show the youth the impact of, them being able to use their voice?
Yes, I love this question. If we go to the next slide, I want to introduce a concept that we use called healing-centered engagement. I think a lot of people are very familiar with the term trauma-informed care. And I think to supplement that or in addition to that, there's what's called healing-centered engagement, and it really helps people recognize that they are more than what has happened to them. It's not clinical, it's really strengths-based, but it anchors folks in culture and identity as part of their healing process. And I think what is happening when folks don't realize the value of their voice is because they are living in circumstances where their voice was either disregarded, not listened to, or they're in an environment where it doesn't feel emotionally safe. So I think wrapping that up from like a healing perspective and offering some of those opportunities is a way to really uplift their voice and help them recognize the impact of that. So some strategies that we used that are healing centered are really incorporating like mindfulness and self-regulation into the storytelling. So I would always have like mindfulness check-ins or coach them through like breathwork strategies that could help them during their advocacy. Of course, really building their confidence up and pouring into them, encouraging them to give kudos to one another, but also making sure we give them all their flowers while they're with us. And then discussing like identity and culture and lived experience, again, as a way to help them like use advocacy as a pathway to their own healing too. And then really fostering those meaningful connections. So just checking in with folks more, helping them feel like they're really seen and heard. I think that's what starts to give people confidence in their voices and confidence with their sharing.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Kristen. I know we've had some of our mentees to just participate in that advocacy cohort with voices. And I can tell you, we can definitely see just some of the growth in them and that confidence building piece. So thank you so much. So,
yeah, of course. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So, Kendall, thanks for joining us. Now we want to kind of shift gears because I would love to hear a little bit about your experience from more of a youth advocate's perspective.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's so great to see that we have so many participants, and I saw some people from Northern Kentucky, so shout out to y'all. And yeah, I can just dive into why I'm here basically, and my experience with being a young person, but also being an advocate, and how those two aspects of myself have really influenced how I view the world, and also how, you know, the world interacts with me. So just to start my experience with mentoring, I became a mentee in 2018. I think that was like my sophomore year of high school, after being recommended because I was a first generation student and I really wanted to go to college and I had really good grades, but basically I had no idea really what to do with them. So after I became a mentee, I was super into it, and me and my mentor kind of just stuck together like glue. It was an amazing experience, and I sort of became the face of my mentoring program that next year. And my mentoring program is called Covington Partners. And basically they were like, hey, we want you to serve as a young person on our board, because we want to know like how you feel about the things that we do, especially when money is involved. So that was a really important, I think, first step into my experience with being, you know, not just like a mentee or just a young person, but a young person with a voice that people really wanted to hear and cared about. And that same year, I sort of had this life-changing experience with a mentor, and they had a cohort called the Youth Advocates for Mentoring, which we have another panelist here, Khalil, and that's where I met him. And it was a super cool experience. They've flown 12 people out from across the nation, 12 young people, to train them on basically how to advocate effectively as a young person. And this experience, like I said, was crazy, life-changing. I'd never been on a plane before. Like, it was just nuts, but it was amazing. And I think that experience really solidified, this is what I'm meant to do. I am meant to be in the mentoring field as a mentoring champion, just, you know, getting things done and getting the work done. And so after that, I kind of had my experience with the National Mentoring Research Center, which I kind of used the experience of being a youth advocate for mentoring. And I got to write a peer mentoring guide, which is something I'm super passionate about, and which is something that Covington Partners has been working on a lot recently. So it's been really cool to see them kind of apply this guide to real life. And currently, I'm a freshman at the University of Louisville, and I'm working with a local mentoring program called the Decode Project, in which I serve as a literacy mentor. So basically, I'm helping marginalized children who go to schools and that do not receive proper funding, and helping them learn how to read effectively, which is an essential skill, obviously. And I'm also working on starting my own mentoring program for first generation students and keeping that wonderful cycle of love and education going.
Thank you, Kendall. So what would you say are some of the best practices and strategies related to youth advocacy?
Yeah, so during my training as a youth advocate for mentoring, I learned a lot of things from a lot of different people, and it was kind of hard to kind of make it concise and squish it all into one little slide, but it's cool. So one of my big pointers is have a clear goal in mind before starting. So I think just the term advocacy in itself can be a little daunting, can be a little crazy, and I think a lot of young people can relate to, you know, we want to do everything all the time at once, like, and we never want to give ourselves like, hey, wait, maybe we should slow down and like think this through a little bit, because we're so excited about like, I want to accomplish something, like I want to be like change. But, you know, especially things like advocacy, and if you're delving into politics a little bit, things can be slow, and you want to make sure you know what you're trying to do, you know what you're trying to accomplish before you sort of dive right in. And that's where a good mentor comes in. Also, you really want to garner an understanding of your target audience, like if you're advocating for a certain issue, who is this issue affecting, and who would support you. So I remember one of the big things that was kind of intimidating to me when I first began advocacy was like, I felt like I was really trying to represent an entire group of people. And even though I had experienced that issue as well, it's not like my experience is the only lived experience in the world. So before you really embark on your advocacy journey, I just really suggest getting out in your community, actually, doing the work, doing, sort of the ground level stuff, and really trying to understand the people that you're working for and working with. Because then obviously you can be the best advocate that you can be. So yeah, and sort of like the first point, create a concrete plan, look at examples from other activists. I think I didn't realize when I first started out just how many other youth advocates there were, just first of all in America, but second of all just around the world. And I don't think youth advocates are really given as much of a platform maybe than older advocates, which is just the fact of life. It's just the way the cookie crumbles, sadly. So I think it's really easy to feel like you're the only person doing it. So I'd say do your research and look at other activists and look at what they're doing and look at what works for them. Do your little comparisons. Are they in a more rural area? Are they in a more urban area? Who's their target audience? And once you sort of draw those comparisons, you can kind of be like, okay, this seems like a feasible thing that I can do. And then also one of the last and most important points I'd say is build a coalition, make as many connections as possible and build on them. So when you're advocating for your issue, you don't want to do it all by yourself. Like, it's really hard and it's really scary, and I don't recommend it. And I don't think that people realize how many there are people out there that are able to support them and who want to support them. And that's something I didn't realize. But once you really start advocating for your issue, getting out there, speaking about it at like events or town halls or whatever, then you can really start getting an idea of like, okay, this is kind of cool. People are kind of liking what I'm saying, and people want to be a part of what you're doing, especially young people. So really building on those connections, I think, will really help in terms of your whole advocacy journey, and also lessening the workload on yourself.
Oh, thank you, Kendall. That's great advice. So how would you say that mentors can support their mentees in their advocacy efforts?
Yes, forgive this old picture of me. That was my junior year of high school. But basically, my mentor was a super huge and important part of my advocacy journey. And I could have done it without her, but I wouldn't want to have done it without her. And so some of my big takeaways from that experience is making communication a habit. I think, and when I say communication, I mean like communication, like you are sitting down, talking, getting to the nitty gritty of things, even if it's a little bit uncomfy. Because I think a lot of the times between mentors and mentees, you're kind of like skirting around this, like, should I say this? Because obviously you want to keep up that connection. But I think one of the most important things about having a mentor is being able to be honest with them, even if you guys don't necessarily agree on all aspects of everything, because you're both human beings, and that's such an important thing to remember. Just being clear when something bothers you or if you need help, and being able to say that is so important, first of all, in just progression, and also just building your relationship with your mentor. Also, another thing that's super important that a lot of other youth advocates we kind of shared together was how it's really important for mentors to let mentees take the wheel when it comes to their own advocacy efforts. Like I said, even if the mentor doesn't personally relate to what they're advocating for, or maybe doesn't personally understand or agree, just letting the mentee be the one to take the wheel, and the mentor just being along for the ride. You know, you can be sort of that cruise control, that, you know, guiding force that's like, hey, like maybe this isn't working, but this could be a different possible route. Or, hey, maybe this person, you're trying to email them and you're getting a bunch of non-responses. Let's move to this person. That sort of thing is really helpful. For a mentor to do, rather than dictating, okay, this is everything that you're going to do and you're going to do it this way, or it's not going to work. So first of all, that's just a really great way to build like trust between you and your mentee, but also like letting your mentee feel like they're actually qualified to, you know, do the advocacy, because they just need that support. Also, just regularly checking in and making your presence known. Just, hey, I'm here if you need anything. Like, hey, if you want to like go get food and we can sit here and talk about this, or hey, if you're stressed about this, like just let me know. Just that sort of thing. Just being that, you know, constant little presence, that little person on their shoulder, being like, hey, you're not alone in this, and you have somebody that you can talk to. Also, you know, just offering help and finding resources or building connections. That resources and connections are like the two biggest things when it comes to advocacy, and you can't really have one without the other. So just being consistent, and also, you know, doing what you can to help on the side, especially if your mentee asks for it.
No, thank you. So what advice do you have for youth that want to actually become involved in advocacy work?
Yeah, so there's me and my little Youth Advocates for Mentoring t-shirt. Super exciting, super awesome. And you can kind of see on my face, I'm overwhelmed, but I am excited. And I think those are two really big experiences and feelings that young people have when it comes to advocacy, because it's like, wow, I feel crazy, I feel important, I feel smart, but also it's like, also, I'm a little scared right now because I have to talk to so many people, and a lot of these people are older than me, and that's crazy. But like I said, just it's okay to just take a step back and be like, okay, I'm probably in high school, or I'm in college, or I'm in middle school, and there's a lot of things going on with my life right now, and things are changing, and I don't have to be the smartest person in the room right now, and that's okay. You know, sort of just allowing yourself to just take that pressure off of your shoulders and taking a step back. And it's okay to not be in advocacy mode like 24/7. You can also just be a young person and want to have fun, or want to worry about, you know, other things that are going on with your life. That's a completely valid thing to feel. I remember when I was in sort of the peak of my advocacy with Mentor, I felt really guilty if I was doing literally anything else than working on, you know, my issue or my policy memo, because I was like, how can I be an advocate if I'm not dedicating 100% of my life and body and soul to this issue? But that's not how real life works, and you're a human being, and your best work comes when you rest and when you take care of yourself. And that's not something I realized towards the end of my journey. So I just think it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Again, asking for help often. It's okay to admit you don't know everything. Nobody in this world knows everything. You feel a lot of pressure to be an expert on your issue, but it's okay if you're not completely like extremely know everything, every single nuance, every single gray area. It's okay. Just ask questions and be open to learning. Also, only work with those who you know will be able to commit with what you're working on. We've all had been in a group project in school, and we've all been the one to be the only one who is putting in the work. And with advocacy, that can be just really draining and really disheartening. So when you're making these connections, make sure that you sort of lay down your boundaries, lay down like, hey, this is sort of the pace in which I want things to go. And also, you know, be forgiving with people, but also be like, hey, like, we're trying to get work done, you know? And then my last one, and it's sort of something I touched on earlier, but just connect with other youth advocates. You don't even necessarily have to connect with them in like a businessy sort of way. Just get to know them, be their friend. And from that, it's just super extremely valuable. And yeah, it's just a really invaluable experience that I really recommend for everyone. Some of the best people I know are youth advocates. So yeah, just reach out.
Oh, Kendall, you just gave some great advice, and thank you for the awesome self-care tip. Rest, rest. All right. Well, we are going to move on and talk a little bit about mentoring, leadership, and advocacy. So we have Khalil here with us. Khalil, thank you for being with us. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience and the work that you've done around youth advocacy?
Yeah, so hello, everybody. My name is Khalil Sacco. I have the pleasure of speaking after two wonderful guests or speakers. So I'll start with a little bit of my experience. I've been a youth advocate and I've done advocacy work since I was 14, which was really the program age in Pittsburgh. The first program I was a part of was Amachi. I was a youth ambassador for youth with incarcerated loved ones. I'm a part of this program. As being a member of this program, I attended national youth conferences, and the program consisted of 2 Saturdays out of the month. The youth ambassadors will get together to discuss issues concerning our communities and planning to recruit members, and we would be panelists at community meetings in the community of Pittsburgh. It's a pretty great experience. While being a youth ambassador, I was also a part of a program called Blackmail Leadership Development Institute, which is a program that nurtures high school students by hosting a 1-week residential leadership summit at Robert Morris University. Throughout the year, BMLDI youth would attend Saturday institutes, 2 Saturdays throughout the month. So it was a 1-week residential stay, which was like an amazing program. It was probably around 400 to 500 African-American males. We would stay on campus at RMU, Robert Morris, for a week. It gave us so much exposure. It increased our leadership skills, and it increased our likelihood of post-secondary success with all the exposure that it was providing to us at a young age. Next and currently, I'm a mentor for Man Up, which is Men of America Nurturing and Ushering Progress. Man Up is an HBCU mentoring program that serves students in the K through 12 system, primarily serving students in middle school. From there, I was selected to be a youth advocate for mentoring, which I am blessed to have had this opportunity. Youth advocates train 12 young leaders on advocacy, policy, and grassroots organizing. Youth advocates presented their policy memos to members of Congress. Here I served as a youth advocate. I learned about policy. I received way more exposure than I was expecting, all while building my research, interpersonal, and teamwork skills. Currently, I'm also a leader for STS Elite Memphis. STS Elite pathways students from Memphis colleges to job opportunities, as well as enriches their public image, leadership skills, and connections. STS Elite provides a lot of students with different skills that they need: resume building, LinkedIn building, and professional headshots, as well as different events like Sip and Paint for, of course, the mature crowd, mature members older than 21. And they also have like events in the city where a lot of jobs representatives from FedEx and Nike and Amazon and government positions for Shelby County come together, and it's kind of like a social event. So they do a lot of good work in the city. So then to talk a little bit more about my policy work that I started with Mentor, my policy work is centered around transforming the school to prison pipeline into the school to career pipeline. My policy work stated that Congress should allocate federal funding for HBCU mentoring programs that provide Title I schools with mentors, and also programs that allow HBCU alumni to serve HBCU students as mentors. A lot of this work was centered around the racial disparities that happen in the education system when it relates to discipline for African American students, and this was my proposed solution to that. Being a member of a HBCU mentoring program, I saw the effects that it had in the classroom. Me and my colleague, we mentored 2 youth in the classroom who would maybe be considered more at risk when it comes to classroom disruption. However, we had to come in with suits, which automatically demanded respect in the classroom. And we would take the 2 mentees and we kind of have a breakout session while the teacher is kind of explaining the lesson plan that day. So it was pretty effective. It was very effective. And all the students were engaged in classroom. And then the students kind of got a break and kind of got to be a little silly too. But then as soon as they returned to the classroom, they hit the classroom hard and continued all their work. And they were effective in the classroom. Another portion of the funding I recommended was for Congress to allocate money for federal funding for leadership programs that aim to develop student leaders and advocates. Being a product of these programs, I see the amazing work that it does for the community. To talk a little bit more about the school to career pipeline, I kind of just want to make sure I emphasize what it does effectively. The school to career pipeline combats youth delinquency, and it consists of programs that provide students with real world connections, develop students' professionalism, and transition students to post-secondary success. These connections that these programs will provide can turn into mentors. These connections will support students' transition into the workforce. These connections work to build students' professionalism, and these connections work as social emotional supports for these students. A little overview. A mentor, youth advocacy, and leadership programs all work with students to ensure that they're on their purpose. And furthermore, these programs provide students with outlets that where they can cultivate their professionalism and have a higher chance of post-secondary success.
Okay, so from your experience, what would you say are some of the major differences between that mentoring piece and that leadership and advocacy piece?
So mentoring programs kind of provide the structure for these students. Okay. Mentoring programs work with students to provide them with role models. Mentoring programs improve students' social emotional development, and mentoring programs encourage students to become leaders in the classroom, college, and in their careers. On the kind of the opposite side, but they really work together, leadership and advocacy programs kind of fill in the gaps. Leadership and advocacy programs provide students with opportunities to develop their professionalism and leadership. These programs prepare students to become leaders in their careers, and these programs bridge the achievement gap. As far as where they all intersect, when you're a part of a leadership program, you typically have someone who is in charge of it, who's actually kind of acting as a mentor themselves. So when I want to make sure that I want to emphasize that they're very similar. However, mentoring programs are more structured around providing the mentors, while leadership and advocacy programs are more structured around developing these student leaders.
No, thank you. So when thinking about advocacy work, and I know Kristen and I have talked about this because I know some of our girls that were in the advocacy cohort, they were younger. So how can organizations factor in age to best serve youth in the community?
Sure. So age is an important factor in assessing where a student is now and how to best support them. We want to make sure that if we're having a program of youth advocates aged 14 to 21, we want to make sure that the older students are gaining a lot more of the experience while the younger students are gaining a lot more of the exposure. In this framework, the journey starts at the early mentoring phase, where it's ages 10 to 14, roughly, this phase improves the student's social emotional development. This phase serves the youth. The next phase is the leadership training phase. So ages 14 to 15, while these students are young, we want to make sure that they are engaged in the classroom and completing their coursework. I'm sorry, this is for the early mentoring phase. By mentoring at-risk students, the likelihood of classroom disruption decreases significantly. So all of this works to improve the social emotional development. Now moving on to the leadership training phase. So for ages 14 to 18, we want to work to develop student leaders. We want to introduce these students to post-secondary success options. As they're becoming more mature, they are working towards post-secondary success. It's time to start kind of providing them with their options. In this phase, we want to work to and provide students with opportunities to gain leadership experience. One of the biggest setbacks for students and kind of one of the biggest scares for them when it comes to post-secondary success is they're not typically equipped as leaders to move on to that phase. Their interpersonal skills aren't all developed, their leadership skills aren't all developed, and they kind of feel like they've always been breezed over. In this phase, we also want to work with students to develop their professionalism, and we want to provide them with college mentors. Moving on into the last phase is the post-secondary success phase. So this is for ages 18 and up. We want to continue to develop these students' professionalism and increase their exposure to careers. We want to transition these students into success following high school, such as trade school, college, and careers. We want to continue to work with students to develop their professionalism, and we want to provide these students with field experience, connections, and career mentors. Mentors are in every step and phase of this model and framework. Most successful adults have important mentors that support them throughout their careers. Mentors serve in all of these phases, but I want to make sure I emphasize that when it comes to leadership development, assessing someone's age and where they are is going to help them tremendously in assessing where they're going in their next 5 years.
So overall, what ways or, what would you have to say are some ways can organizations and programs better serve youth?
So the next, this framework, the career development continuum, by promoting this framework, students are more equipped to pursue their careers. This framework provides students with the perspective needed to create a 5-year plan. This framework consists of encouraging youth to pursue degrees as assets. Once you invest in a degree, that degree is yours. As long as you hit the workforce within the next 2 to 3 years after achieving your degree, everything, all your experience, the degree, it all becomes an asset on what step you take next in your journey towards either higher pay or a more fulfilling position. In this framework, we also want to promote to youth that college is a fun learning journey. You learn more about yourself, you learn more about what you want to do, and you gain more insight on where you want to be in society. I think that there's a stigma around college isn't for everyone that I feel like is a stigma that shouldn't necessarily be as encouraged as there are many avenues that you can take towards success. There are trade degrees that pay more than the salary of a bachelor's degree, and it's less time and it could be more fulfilling to someone than a bachelor's degree. So I always encourage that the degree moves you to experience, which moves you to higher pay and freedom in your career. When I say freedom in your career, I really am talking about breaking that glass ceiling. When you gain the degree and then you gain the experience on top of that, the youth can enter into the workforce better prepared to excel, to move on or move up to a different position in their career. One principle that I want to kind of go over is the each one reach one principle. This principle basically states that programs want to create models that account for youth served in the program. You want to ensure that all youth accounted for benefits from the program, and you want to ensure that all youth accounted for is on track to post-secondary success. When I use the term account, when you gain funding for a program, you are accounting for a certain amount of students. You want to make sure that the students that you're accounting for the program benefits equally, and they and there's something where there's something that's supporting them to post-secondary success. You don't want to just throw them out the bird's nest. And then lastly, for advice would be funding. Make programs fun and engaging. We're working with youth. Youth aren't going to go to a program that's not fun or it's not engaging. They might not even see the benefit in the skills provided by the program. However, if you make it fun and engaging, youth would become more inclined to attend the program. Ensure that the programs are working to develop students supporting them. Be unique with incentives for students. These incentives create exclusivity and prestige in the program.
Now, thank you so much for sharing, Khalil. So I have a couple of questions before we get to the resources and all of the questions that are in the chat. What ideas, and this is for all three of you, can you lend to organizations, just tangible ideas, do you have for the organizations that are looking to involve youth in using their voice?
Yeah, so I'll start. Some of the tangible ideas that I provided was tangible resources to help express voice in the virtual space, such as podcasts, YouTube, and blog posts. So when we talk about these type of round table discussions that we want to have, or providing youth with the tools, the tangible tools to express their voice, we want to actually provide them with microphones, a portion allocated from the website for them to use their voice, and for them to create podcasts, get the other youth engaged, or get other youth engaged. And then that kind of feeds into the next one, which is leading the roundtable discussions or hosting events on youth-centered issues and giving them a platform within their school. This is very important, because without this, are they really a youth advocate if they don't have the platform? And then lastly, exposure and opportunities to community and professional settings. In my opinion, and in my work, and in speaking in terms of developing these students and youth, we need to make sure that they're in the circles where they can prosper. So if they are in like a town hall meeting, it's going to give them the structure and the professionalism to be able to advocate whatever concern they have in the town hall meeting. They might go last. They may not get a chance to speak in the town hall meeting, but at least the more times and more exposure they get, the more prepared they'll be to actually speak up. And they may not want to, but after so many attending the meeting, town hall meetings, or community meetings, they're going to want to voice their concerns. And the sweetest voice can move a room.
Oh, thank you. I'd love to hear from Kristen or Kendall.
Yeah, I think I was the one that shared peer mentoring. I think that it's really important to recognize that the mentor-mentee relationship it's a mutual one. I know that I get just as much from my young mentees as and I consider young people my mentors all the time. So I think it's really important to remember that relationship is going both ways. And then the other ones I added were just storytelling coaching and justice advocacy. Again, those are there are lots of trainings, free ones or paid ones or consultants that you can get. But storytelling can be a really tricky thing to craft. So it's good to get some resources for that. And then, of course, life skills development. I think that's a lot of what Khalil has been talking about as well, like pathways to careers. I think those would be really, really useful.
Oh, thank you. So just one last question. What would you say are some typical challenges that can arise in youth advocacy? What are some of those bumps in the road, that mentors and organizations and program staff should watch out for, and youth advocates?
Yeah, I think that scheduling is hard. You have to get really creative because they have school, they're subject to other people's schedules, their family or their household schedules, so it's just not their own all the time. And a lot of young folks also work. So being really creative with scheduling and making sure that's accessible. Something that I would do different is, instead of meeting after school when folks are pretty winded and tired, is like considering meeting on weekends or times when people are a little more available or fresher. But also taking into account that a lot of young people do work. So just being really creative about how you meet with people so it's accessible. Supporting them through life stressors, figuring out how to do that. And then I'd be remiss as a social worker to not name that you have to have resources available for how to handle youth and young people in crisis. So if somebody is reporting to you that they want to hurt themselves or other people, or someone is hurting them, it's really important to have resources and a protocol for how to address that in the moment, how to follow up on that, and how to support them if that happens.
Yeah, awesome points by Kristen. And some of the things I put down were, first of all, school and familial pressures. And that could look like a lot of different things, but through my personal experience, my family just wasn't too educated and wasn't too like interested in learning about, the things that I was passionate about. And I got a lot of like, why are you doing this? Like, why? And then, like, because I care wasn't like enough of an answer, so I just think just being aware that young people could also be getting some of that, and it's a little bit discouraging because you want your family to really support you, especially because advocacy is kind of, like I said, intimidating and challenging sometimes. So that can be sort of a disheartening experience. So just to be aware that that's a thing that happens, and not every household is super supportive or aware of, advocacy efforts. And the second thing I put down is access to resources. And this is a really big one that I always try and stress because it's something that is really near and dear to me. There are just some things I think that we learn to just take for granted, and we don't really understand that some things are just not a norm for everyone. Like, I didn't have like a proper cell phone service until my junior or senior year of high school. I still don't have proper, transportation as to where I can transport myself places. So I just think, first of all, don't assume that young people have these things, because then it makes them feel embarrassed that they don't have them. And also just being flexible when you learn, like, okay, this person doesn't have a car, this person can't drive, or this person's family doesn't have a car, or, just being trying to be as flexible as you can with those things, I think is really, really, really important, and is like the key to making you feel comfortable within your program.
Thank you so much, Kendall. Khalil, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, so from my experience, lack of incentives is a big thing. I feel like the most successful programs that I've been in or been a part of, there was pizza, there was something. Pizza, there was a stipend, there was an honorarium. I think I'm saying that right. Just make sure that there's incentives for the program, even if it's just pizza, because coming on a Saturday to see your friends, talk a little bit about what issues are going on in your community, kind of like depress, and then eating some pizza, just an amazing Saturday, productive Saturday too. And then youth engagement. One of the issues, well, I wouldn't necessarily say I've seen it as much, but I know that some programs face these issues, is engaging youth. And I personally would just recommend that there are just more kind of fun activities or more incentives to kind of combat the youth engagement lack. There could be anything. Being as creative as possible typically gets youth engaged and interested in the program.
No, thank you, Khalil. Look, I wouldn't consider myself like a super young person, and I still like pizza. Everyone loves a good slice of pizza. So we do have some resources for you that you can use. So Voices for Virginia's Children, they have a ton of resources on their website that can support you in storytelling, advocacy guides, future workshops, and things of that nature. And then Mentor also has some really great advocacy resources that you can use, and you can also sign up for Mentor and advocacy and policy updates at the website. So let's get to some of those questions that are in the chat. If you have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A panel. I'm going to start because people have been typing questions already. So let's see. Sylvia said, could you give examples of what advocacy issues have students championed and where? Well, I'll let them answer, but I know that a few of our girls that did their first advocacy cohort this year, most of what they kind of spoke to was about mental health. Yeah, more so about mental health. And I think we had one young lady that was interested in foster and kinship care.
Yep, you're right, Bianca. A lot of it, I think, is what's relevant for them in the moment. And we know that there is a mental health crisis for young people across the country. But I know about it more intimately within Virginia, but we know that there is an epidemic right now as a result of the stressors of the last couple of years. So a lot of conversation has been around mental health or what their families need to get through this. I know we've had some folks talk about like childcare for their siblings because they're at home caring for siblings while their parents are working, as well as supports that would help their families and their communities thrive. So there was a lot of conversation about like economic justice as well. And for us, we're located in Richmond, Virginia, but we invited youth and young people from across the Commonwealth to apply. But because our General Assembly is based in Richmond, Virginia, that is, before we ended up going virtual, but we were planning to have everyone come in person so we could go to the General Assembly in person.
All right. Kendall and Khalil, did you all want to share a little bit about maybe what advocacy issues did you champion, or maybe just within your network, what you've heard about?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, and I think this is kind of just like, yeah, but a lot of it is really influenced by your area and what you're really exposed to. So for me personally, what I did with Mentor and what I wrote my policy memo on as a youth advocate for mentoring, I advocated for more support for children of adults who had a substance misuse disorder. Which you would think would be like a highly specific issue, but not really if you're from where I'm from. And also a really big thing that Kentucky is facing right now, and that me and a lot of my peers are advocating for, is educational reform within K through 12 institutions. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the concept of like magnet schools versus charter schools versus public schools. And once you get to the spaces where I am currently, where like I'm involved in scholarship programs where I get to interact with a lot of youth from who went to different schools as me, you can really, really see those disparities. So yeah, that's why I'm working with the Decode project here in Louisville. So yeah, I just think a lot of the times advocacy passions are heavily determined by your area and your community. And that's why educational reform is so important to me right now.
Thank you, Kendall. So next question. Any advice on how to better serve incarcerated youth in their journey to becoming advocates?
I'm so glad somebody asked this question. This is a passion of mine. When it comes to youth, incarcerated youth, we shed a tear because we couldn't reach them at a young age. However, that's why I wanted to emphasize post-secondary success. If a student has been incarcerated previously, that doesn't mean that he doesn't want to better his life or her life. And if they aren't necessarily wanting to pursue college or a four-year degree, we want to make sure that they are aware of their trade school options or their paid options. Even becoming a barber pays a lot more than some jobs. So that's the first thing I'll say on how to better serve these youth is making sure that you're supporting them in their journey to entering society and providing them with leadership tools and things of that nature. And then the second thing is, like I said, just the support and the love from the rest of the group and the acceptance is enough for them to feel warmed and welcomed.
Thank you, Khalil. So next question. I currently work in a program for 18 to 21-year-olds. We see an overall lack of natural supports for this age range, and I've been searching for a connection to mentorship programs. Yep, but they all seem to be for younger kids. Any suggestions on connections for young adults?
I can just say from my experience going to an institute of higher education, there are a lot of mentoring, at least for my school specifically. There are a lot of programs in which, like, you know, you get mentored by like a senior or a junior. But I think that's a great question because, again, that's an institute of higher education, and, you know, not everyone who is above the age of 18 goes to that. So yeah, I just think that's a great question. And I think maybe it'd be great to start thinking about more support and more resources for that specific group of people who don't go to college. So
I would also consider maybe reaching out to local like Greek organizations, fraternities, sororities. A lot of them have like volunteerism as part of their missions. And so I think mentoring and connecting with young adults might be within their purview.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with mentoring programs for that age range in a college setting. I teach at a university at a HBCU, and there are mentoring programs there, but it's a lot of it's informal mentoring, or it's through like the fraternities and sororities, or even alum that, you know, come back to pour into the current students. All right. Let's see, how do you keep justice-involved youth actively involved and engaged, ongoing in mentoring activities? Well, we just had our first advocacy cohort, so this is new for us. Like I said, I'm a part-time ED for 2 organizations. In the one organization, we do pretty purpose mentoring and enrichment activities for adolescent and teen girls. And so I would say, you know, one way that we have been keeping them engaged from, I guess, apart from the advocacy cohort is, you know, they do have mentors. And so prior to them starting with our program, they were already engaged in mentoring activities, and we'd always ask them, what are some of the things that you want to do? What are some of the things that you want to learn? What are some of the experiences that you want to have? And so they're an integral part of like planning what a year worth of activities looks like for our program. So I would say that, you know, them having a voice in it pretty much keeps them engaged. Like one thing they want to talk about is relationships, because our girls are at that age where, you know, they're engaging in relationships with boys and young gentlemen. And so one thing they told us is, hey, we've got to have this on the calendar. And so this is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And, you know, they showed up for our Healthy Relationships workshop because they knew that we were going to have some good girl talk And, we're also going to provide some resources and strategies around healthy relationships. And I think part of that stems from, they know what to expect because they really do have a say-so in some of the activities that we're planning. But this was also their first year in the advocacy cohort. So I don't know if they are justice involved, but this is very new for them. All right. What are some good incentives we could offer that work for virtual engagement? So we do we do gift cards. Sometimes we'll do little gifts that align with the different themes and months during the year. Additionally, we do like a spin the wheel. That's some ways that we kind of bolstered our virtual engagement up for our mentoring program, specifically during the year where I think it was March 2020 when school shut down and we had to go all virtual for quite some time until the schools opened back up. Kristen, did you want to talk a little bit about this? And Khalil and Kendall, did y'all want to share a little bit about like some, good incentives?
Yeah, I think stipends were a big, that's the big one. That's the main one. I mean, we're asking for extra time and effort. And so we want to be able to like pour into them in that way. But I think what we found also is that kind of like Khalil had mentioned earlier, the opportunity to join together with like-minded young folks was often enough. So making sure that the program is pouring into them, pouring into their passions, and elevating that so that they have their own personal buy-in as stakeholders, I think is a huge incentive to getting young folks involved and staying with it.
I completely agree with what Kirsten said. I honestly would add just a little bit more. When it comes to virtual engagement and youth, kind of making some type of in-space meeting the glue that holds it all together. So I wouldn't say that you guys maybe would meet every Saturday or one Saturday out of the month like you typically would do, but maybe like if it's a camp retreat or something, just to kind of meet up in face because we're humans and we like human interaction. But limited because we're in the new virtual space.
Thank you. Let's see, next question. These are really good questions. Regarding youth career pathways, do you see there's a focus from the employer side to engage more with youth in schools to create programs that help them develop a career plan and assist students in overcoming their barriers?
I'll speak on this question. There's two sides that I see it. So there's one side where employers provide funding from their philanthropy department for programs to do what you named. And on the opposite side of it, I know especially in Memphis, employers such as FedEx, Nike, and Amazon will have recruiters come to the school, will talk to the students, will work with the students. Some programs in Memphis that I know of are nursing programs and trade programs come to the schools as well to provide students with some of those options. And that's typically, it's very beneficial because it provides them with a lot of resources and options.
Thank you, Khalil. All right. How do you mentor a young man who tells you he is just an introvert and is not necessarily willing to get involved with activities or is willing to share with others? This is a 20-year-old who is currently a junior in college.
I'll say this, I'm an introvert and an extrovert, more or less an extrovert. But the introvert side of me, when it comes to this, I can definitely understand where he's coming from. I just think that as long as you provide him with the support to help him enter into his career, and just encourage him and make sure that he feels welcomed. Because at one point when I was younger in programs, I was that introvert. I was always anxious of how people saw me or what they thought about me. But it was always the continued warmth and support of the program, and especially the program manager that just always made me feel welcomed and eased that anxiety. So it's one of those things I'll definitely say that kind of comes out, as you age, but just making sure that he's still supported, feels welcomed and loved in the program. And on the side, make sure that he's pursuing his career. He's not just in college, still doesn't have a major and he's a junior, so just make sure he's pursuing something. Check on him.
Yeah, I'll ditto that. And then just like reframing what his natural talents are. I mean, there are so many people that participate in so many ways, and it's not just verbal, it's not just public speaking. You can advocate through social media, you can advocate through blog writing. Everyone has different natural talents and ways that they can contribute. There's no need to be a great public speaker just to be an advocate.
Thank you. Next question. Looking for student and youth leadership resources and models for an after-school K-12 program in Virginia in order for the students to be involved in planning and leading after-school activities to foster motivation and leadership skills. So Tamiko, I don't know if this is okay for me to point you in the direction of Mentor Virginia, just because there's a ton of resources there, and then Mentor Virginia actually does offer technical assistance consulting, which would be free to you, and maybe they can help you go through some of those resources. So I would be happy to connect with you about that. I'm a consultant for Mentor Virginia. Oh, okay. Have you accessed any of the resources, through there? Okay. All right, great. So I will connect you if you want to just shoot me your email, because I have to send you a link. And I can also just send you some actual resources around, program models and specifically as it relates to leadership. And then we have one question. I wanted to make sure that I got to everyone's question. Do you have any advice or strategies on getting volunteers for a mentor program?
One of the big things that Amachi did, we would get together and we would recruit kids off the street, quite frankly. We would stand outside of like the Giant Eagle and talk to youth, and we would get a lot of youth. I would say I made some very good friends by doing this. It would be, of course, it'd be me, a representative from the program, and a couple of other youth ambassadors, and we would just talk to youth and tell them about our program, and we got a lot of engagement, and we made a lot of connection, and it was pretty simple. It was pretty engaging. It kind of sounds scary at first, but it was pretty welcoming and community-based. On the other side, the program that I went to, BMLDI, I was a part of, they did recruiting in the school district. So they would go to the school district and hand out applications, which created so much exclusivity because you had to have a certain GPA. You had to, of course, answer maybe 8 essay questions. But out of the 10 to 15 kids per class that applied, they probably only selected 3 to 4. And they went to all the school districts in Pittsburgh public schools, which was a pretty cool way to engage the youth.
Yeah, and so when I think about strategies for getting volunteers for a mentoring program, I'm also going to kind of point you in the direction of the National Mentoring Resource Center. There's a lot of, different resources about engaging volunteers, but I would maybe consider sitting down with, I don't know, program staff or whoever's already a stakeholder within the organization, because this is something that we had to do recently. I just think that overall, a lot of the programs that I was encountering through consulting were struggling with volunteers and mentor recruitment. So just maybe having everyone come to the table and go through their networks and considering doing like a recruitment plan. And so that will have a variety of strategies, whether it's social media, direct ads. You know, the data shows that word of mouth is, you know, literally the best strategy for mentor and volunteer recruitment. You know, maybe approaching corporations, small businesses, but really, you know, sitting down to maybe do like a sphere of influence type activity with the people who are already within your organization, because chances are there are people within their networks that may be interested in volunteering. Yep, and someone just said Mentor Connect. Yes, so Mentor Connect is, if you register your program with that, people can just go on there, and if they want to volunteer with your organization, it will shoot it right to you. All right, I think that was all of the questions. So I am going to turn it over to Minnie. I think I was able to get to all of the questions.
Great, thank you so much, Bianca and Kristen, Kendall, and Khalil. Just wanted to transition as we kind of get ready to close out. We have the contact information, the email addresses of all of our presenters and speakers today, so feel free to reach out if you have more questions or wanted to follow up with anybody here. Again, the slides will also be available and sent out to you all so you can access and revisit them And then just as we close out again, just want to share some additional resources we have here at Mentor. I know Bianca mentioned a bunch of these, or most of these. Our affiliate network, we have, I think, 24, 25 affiliates across the country. So we really encourage you to see if you have one in your area and reach out to them. There's always a lot of trainings that they're putting on, as well as being able to connect and provide more support to you and your program. If you're interested in finding a mentoring program in your area or wanting to connect with a mentoring program, you can use the Mentoring Connector. That's also a great way to recruit mentors, and it's all free. So definitely feel free to check out that. And lastly, the National Mentoring Resource Center, which Bianca also mentioned. Mentor Virginia, one of our affiliates, is a technical assistance provider along with Bianca. So they provide mentoring support through the National Mentoring Resource Center. All the training and technical assistance is free and no cost for youth mentoring programs. So we definitely encourage you to check it out there and also see what resources could be helpful for you. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Please help us out by answering the survey. Again, the email in about a week, next week, you'll receive the slides, recording, and feel free to revisit our Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage to see next month's webinar, as long as with an archive of past webinars. Stay in touch with us on the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage and the email. And feel free to join us next week. We'll be having a webinar on goal setting with mentees Thursday, March 17th. So thank you all.